with, if you nothing else, with God. They obviously saw him as a godly person, as a person doing miracles. But what they actually believed, we're not told. We don't know for sure if they actually recognized him as a Messiah or whether they just thought he was a great prophet, like an Elijah or Elisha or something like that, Jeremiah, we don't know what they thought. And that's an important point, because some people make a big deal out of Jesus' comments to certain people that he healed. Not everybody. He doesn't say it to everybody, but every once in a while, Jesus will say to somebody after he heals them, your faith has healed you, or your faith has made you whole. All right? And in those cases, certainly it was their God-given faith, not their self-generated faith, but their God-given faith that brought them to him to get them out of that problem, whatever it was. But he doesn't say it every time. And not only does he not say it to everybody he heals, he doesn't say it in general. He doesn't say it every time. He doesn't say and Jesus healed them all who believed in him. Doesn't say that. Okay? So the miracles were not done in order to create faith. Okay? The faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. Right? So the preaching, the parables, the sermons were done to create faith and strengthen faith. The miracles were done more to back up his claims, his claim to be the Son of God, his claim to be the Messiah and the Savior, the Redeemer. Okay, so the miracles weren't the focus. The miracles were evidence. They weren't the main theme. They were the evidence to support the main theme. Okay, important always to remember that. He wanted them not to tell who he was. Again, Jesus does not want people coming only to be healed or only because he can give them something or do something for them. He wants people to come to hear the word. All right? Again, it is always the word that is the focus. Here's the problem with a lot of Christian worship today, where the word is, in a lot of cases, missing. In a lot of these contemporary worship services, you have very little Bible reading. You have very little scripture at all. Maybe you have one or two passages, and then the pastor or leader or whatever will do a whole lot of preaching, and that's fine. I'm not talking against that. But again, the focus is not on God's word very often. All right, it's more on the music. In many cases in contemporary worship, music really overcomes everything else and overtakes everything else. Here, Jesus was not interested in entertainment. He's not interested in amazing these people with a show, put on a show. What he's interested in is getting them to hear. And that's very difficult if all people hear about his miracles. Excuse me. This was to fulfill what was spoken through Isaiah the prophet. Behold, my servant whom I have chosen, my beloved, in whom my soul is well pleased. Now, when it says this was, as you notice again in italics, so not part of the original text. The NASB is just kind of helping us out here by inserting some English words. But the original Greek was, he warned them not to tell who he was and then to fulfill. Okay? So it wasn't the idea here is not that these passages necessarily talk about that one little topic there about telling them who he was, but rather who he was. That's what the passages are really going to support. Okay, the quotations here from Isaiah are really going to support who Jesus was. Okay, so the idea, don't tell people don't tell people about your miracles that you see and all that. That's really not the focus of the quotations now that are coming. The focus of the quotations, rather, is again who this person is in general. So my servant, so God's servant, whom I have chosen. The word chosen here is the word for Christ, okay, or Messiah. Messiah in Hebrew means chosen, the chosen one or anointed one. All right. In whom my soul is well pleased, I will put my spirit upon him. All right. So we've got all three members of the Trinity here in the Old Testament passage of Isaiah. Okay. We've got God the Father, we've got God the Son, we've got God the Holy Spirit. We've got the servant and the Holy Spirit and the Father who is speaking. Okay. So here's a very good passage. You know, those who deny the Trinity, and those who don't see the Trinity or don't find the Trinity or think the Trinity is something was made up by the early church, here it is in the Old Testament. This is Isaiah was written 600 years before Christ. And proclaim justice to the Gentiles. What kind of justice? Again, people get this all mixed up. Don't be misled by false teachers and preachers, okay? This is not talking about earthly justice. This is not talking about human justice. This is talking about divine justice, all right? And justice, notice where the justice lands. It lands here on the Gentiles, all right? So what is divine justice? What do we mean? What do you suppose he's talking about when he's talking about divine justice here?
Salvation.
Yeah, exactly. Salvation. You know, earthly justice. What would be a good summary of earthly justice that even God sometimes uses? What's a good summary of earthly justice? Well, you rob a bank. What's supposed to happen? You're supposed to get arrested and go to jail. Okay? You kill somebody, unless it's somehow justified or whatever. Used to be anyway. Not so much anymore, although it's kind of coming back. You get killed, right? So I mean, and God talks about this in the Old Testament. We've heard this already in Moses and in Exodus on Sunday mornings. You know, eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, right? Okay, that's earthly justice. You know, you hit me, I hit you back. That's earthly justice. What's divine justice? Divine justice is the opposite. Okay, divine justice is you sin, I forgive you. You commit the sin, I pay for it. Was God speaking? Okay, that's opposite. Okay, in the earthly justice, you commit the sin, you pay. You know, you do the crime, you do the time, right? You commit the crime, you pay the penalty. That's earthly justice. That's the way it is. Okay? Divine justice is not. Divine justice is you do the crime, God does the time. That's divine justice. Okay? So you had, and it's interesting, notice it says the Gentiles. See, the Jews had justice. They had divine justice in a sense. Because they could go, in the Old Testament times, they could go to the tabernacle, they could go to the temple, and they could get divine justice. They could go and they could say, okay, I sinned, I did this or I did that, and they could do a sacrifice and sprinkle blood here and there and whatever, and boom, they would be forgiven, and they would get divine justice. They were able to get divine justice. Notice what it says here. He shall proclaim justice to the Gentiles. Whoa! And again, he's not proclaiming equality, as some preachers would try and tell you. He's not preaching diversity. Okay? He's not preaching equity. All right? He's not doing that. That's not what he's talking about here. And when we get further into the minor prophets on Tuesdays, you'll see that more and more. You'll hear about justice a lot. And it's always important to denote which justice God is talking about. Sometimes he does talk about earthly justice, and sometimes he does say the earthly justice is bad and needs to be fixed. But a lot of times, when God's talking about justice, he's talking about divine justice. He's talking about forgiveness. And as Dave said, he's talking about salvation. All right. He will not quarrel, nor cry out, nor will anyone hear his voice in the streets. Jesus was not a screamer. Okay. Jesus, again, did not put on a show. He was not loud and obnoxious. Okay. He was not like a carnival barker. He was not like somebody, drawing attention to himself. Okay? That's what that verse is talking about. He's not quarrelsome. He's not a debater. He's not interested. Jesus really is not. Now, it's true, now and then he engages the Pharisees, you might say, in debate. It's really not. It's not debate, it's baiting. What he's doing is he's baiting the Pharisees to kind of, again, to get them to come out and be obvious, be clear about what their complaints about him are, so he can deal with them. Okay, he's not really interested in debating. That's really not why he's talking with these guys. Okay, so Jesus is not a debater. He's not a politician. All right, he's not crying out. He's not trying to get attention in that way. Number 20 and is really, really super, super important. And this is a common, this is a very well-known verse that is very often misunderstood. A battered reed he will not break, a smoldering wick he will not put out until he leads justice to victory. And again, that's divine justice. And in his name the Gentiles will hope. Okay, so really important. Battered reed, smoldering wick. Battered reed and smoldering wick. When you hear that, hear you. That's what we are, folks. We are a battered reed, or a bruised reed in some translations, or a bent reed in some translations. We're talking about papyrus. Okay, that's that plant. Looks kind of like a pussy willow, right? That grows in the swamps and in riverbeds and stuff like that. All right, and those things, they're hollow, huh? Where the little willow thing is on top, and the stem is hollow, right? You can break it off. You can breathe in it. You can make a little snorkel out of it. Sometimes you see that in movies all the time. People doing that and breathing that, like bamboo. Okay, except with bamboo, watch out! Don't get yourself a joint, because if you get a bamboo joint, then you can't get air through. But anyway, so this was a good picture in Old Testament times and New Testament times too. Papyrus is still around. It was easy; the wind could blow it over easy. If it had a little bend in it, it will bend all the way over. And once you do that once or twice, if you've ever done that with that stuff, you bend it back and forth a couple times, it breaks. Real simple, real easy. All right. So that's what we are, folks. We're pretty weak. I mean, compare that plant. All right, that river willow or papyrus. Compare that with an oak tree. Which are we? Are we the oak tree, or are we the weak plant? We're the weak plant. Okay, we're sinners. We have worries. We have fears. We have doubts. We have questions. Okay, that's us. To more or less extent. Some people are a little more sturdy than others, but in general, that's us. Okay, and we can be blown over. And so, if you're already a little bent and you're weak, okay, Jesus is not going to break you off. Okay, he's not going to make it worse. Right, and same with the smoldering wick. You blow out a candle, right, for a minute, for a second or so. It's got that glowing tip, and it smolders a little bit. Maybe if you blew on it really, really hard again, it would flare up, okay, and reignite. Okay, so there's heat there. There's fire there. Okay, it's kind of subdued, but there's fire there. That's us. Okay, we're the smoldering wick. We have fire. We have a little smoke. We have a little heat. Okay, but we're not a big torch. Okay, well, Jesus is going to come along and put us out. that the work of the Messiah, indeed the work of all of us as believers in the world, is not to break the already bent and not to snuff out the smoldering. Okay? That's not our job. Our job is not to put more burdens on the weak. Okay? That's not our job. And we're talking spiritual here. So when people come into religion, when people come into church, when people come into faith, all right, they're usually weaker than many others. And it is incumbent upon us not to put more burdens on them. Okay? You want to give them comfort. You want to give them the gospel. You want to give them hope. You want to give them peace. Okay? You don't want to come and say, well, now you got to do this and this and this and this and this and this and this, and you got to give up that and do that, and that's right there, folks. That's a sign of a cult. You want to know what a cult is? That's a good way to tell what a cult is. You want to join their little merry band, all right? They're going to put you through the paces. They're going to run you through an obstacle course. All right, you got to do this and this and this and this and this. You got to accomplish all these things. You got to check these boxes. Got to do A, B, C, 1, 2, 3. All right. That's the opposite. That's the opposite of this. Battered wheat you will not break off. Smoldering wick you will not put out. No, you want to do that. You want to be kind to people. You want to be comforting to them. You want to give them peace. You want to fan the flame. You want to brace that reed. Embrace it, make it stand up straighter. Okay, you want to give it strength. Okay, and you don't do that by putting demands on there, right? That's legalism. Now it is true. We expect people. We don't expect people to. I was telling the catechism girl today. I don't expect people to do things. To be a member of this church. Okay? I don't expect them to do things, right? Yeah, she has memory work, but I don't grade it. I see if she gets the gist. If she gets the gist, that's good enough. That's fine. It's not what you do. It's what you believe. I do expect that, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. That's not. I don't think that's putting a whole lot of things, actions on people. You have them read the scriptures. You have them explain it to them, and you say, "Well, this is what it means clearly," and you expect them to respond. You expect them to say, "Yeah, I believe that." And if they don't believe it, then well, that's different. But that's not something that you necessarily do one way or another. That's something that grows in you, okay? So it's a real important point, okay? Too often in the church, Christian church, in the whole history of the Christian church since the days of the apostles to today, too often church has become an obstacle course. Too often church has become things that you have to do and you have to accomplish in order to get any peace or comfort. And that's exactly the opposite of what Jesus is talking about here, what Isaiah is talking about when he's talking about the Messiah, Jesus. Okay. Let's look at the notes real quick. Jesus continued to do great miracles, healing multitudes. Okay. Again, anybody and everybody. Didn't matter who they were. I'm sure, if there was a Pharisee that asked for healing, he got healing too. Yet Jesus is not ready to reveal himself completely, so he forbids the multitude from giving him unnecessary publicity. This is the key. Okay? Unnecessary publicity. He's going to get publicity. He's more than a year and a half into his ministry. People know about him. People are going to recognize him by now. So he knows it's going to be almost impossible to get completely away from crowds, but he doesn't want, again, the unnecessary publicity. This fulfills Isaiah 42, which describes the person and character of Jesus, a chosen servant, Messiah again, loved and obedient, loved by God, obedient to God, and will bring salvation to the Gentiles. You know, one of the mysteries of the Old Testament is how many times the Gentiles are mentioned by the prophets. And yet how the Jews never, ever, ever did any what we would call evangelism. That is a mystery. How they missed that point is mysterious, is odd. How often the prophets, how often, even all the way back down to the days of Moses, talked about a light to the Gentiles. Okay? That the Jews were supposed to be a light to the Gentiles. The Jews were supposed to lead the Gentiles to God. They were supposed to be a witness to God. Never were. Never did an outreach program. Never did evangelism. You know? Never invited people to come to know the Lord. Never. Not in their entire history. Still not really good at it today. Right? There has been some growth. There's been a little bit of growth among the Jewish population as far as their religion is concerned, but most of it is from the birth, having children among the Orthodox, among the Hasidim and those. Okay, they're having children 9, 10 at a time, and so you know there's been some growth there, but again, they make a special point. And I found this out too when I was in El Paso, talked to rabbis there. They make a special point not to proselytize, not to try and convert people. Converting people to Judaism is not something that they're real big on. Okay? If you want to become Jewish, if you want to, change your religion to Judaism, oh yeah, they'll take you in, grudgingly, but they're not out to convert people. They're not out to build their churches, their synagogues. They're not out. That's not out there. And that's always been the case. That's been the case all the way back in the Old Testament. And again, I think it's a bit of a mystery.
Don't you think there would have been much more demanding on the Jews? Jewish, you're not living up to what
That's true. Yes. Yeah. They I think I've heard rabbis say that, well, if we could just get the non-practicing Jews back to the synagogue and back into their faith, that would be, that we'd double our numbers, which is probably true. It's probably. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, and the good friend of my daughter's, they hung out for many years, shared a condo for many years, and he was a Jewish light. He loved cheeseburgers and bacon and ham and all that stuff. But he went to I think his folks' house for Hanukkah, and I think he went for Rosh Hashanah or not Yom Kippur maybe, and that was about it. That was it. So and maybe somebody's bar mitzvah he'd go to, but that was about it. He had broken stick and a burned out lamp wick represented the weak in faith, and really. Yeah, it represents all of us, really. I mean, we're all that way at some sense or another. The ill, the lame, the blind. Jesus would continue to heal these people as the gospel was taught. Once again, Jip, let's move on from that. Verse 22 and so on. Before we do that, go ahead.
Here too. Just the opposite of what we're talking about with the Jewish. As you apply that, say, to the Catholics, right? They're sitting there at one time. If you were Catholic and you didn't go to service, that was really shunned.
Oh yeah.
Well, they
sure.
kind of backed off on that, and what's happened now? Their turnout is much lower, also.
Well, yeah. Well, I think that's true across the board, though. I mean, that's true in the Protestant church, Catholic church, every church. I mean, it used to be, yeah. I mean, well, there wasn't anything else to do on Sundays. I mean, there really wasn't. I've said before, my hometown, there was nothing open. There was nothing. No, you couldn't go to the grocery. You couldn't go to the grocery. Well, yeah. A little bit, but but that wasn't for us. I guess we got home to watch that, a little bit of that. But You know, the rest of the country, that was the afternoon. You know, Sunday morning was there was nothing. There was nothing. There was no grocery stores open. There was no gas stations open. There was nothing. There was nothing to do. And so, well, you might as well go to church. So, yeah, I think you're right. There's a lot of lapsed Catholics or you know, Sunday morning Catholics, or not even Sunday morning Catholics, I guess you could say, Roman Christians. But that's true of Protestant church too. You know, it never ceases to amaze me. Every once in a while, we'll get a visitor here. Haven't had one in a while, but every once in a while, we'll get a visitor here, and they'll be sitting in the back of the church. Always sneak in the back, you know. And hi, how are you? Whatever, you know, and where are you from? You know, oh, we're from Minnesota. We're from Wisconsin. We're from Michigan. We're from, you know, whatever. You know, oh yeah, oh nice. Are you visiting here? You know, no, we live here. How long you lived here? 20 years. Oh, yeah. What church did you go to back in Akaнаkamawak or whatever? You know, and oh, we went to St. Matthew's. Oh, that's the Wells Church. And yeah, Akaнаkamawak. Yeah, that's the Wells Church. Yeah, that's where I baptized. And you've been living here for 20 years? Yeah. Well, it's good to see you finally. But no, I've estimated, based on just some research and surveys that I've done, I'm estimated there's probably 100 Wells families, Wisconsin families in Sierra Vista at least, that don't show up. They could, but they don't. And I don't know anything about them, and they haven't told their hometown pastor maybe where they live or anything like that, so I haven't got any. And also, every year I get a dozen or more referrals for people coming on post, for soldiers coming on post. I get at least a dozen of those. And I would say out of 10 or 12 or 15 of those a year that I get, maybe one or two will actually show up. So yeah, we've got a lot of lapsed people too, for that matter. But again, it used to be, yes, that was, you know, that was verboten. You know, if you didn't go to church on Sunday, or, you know, family would have words with you. And so the Catholics, the Romans, they have reduced their number of services or Sundays that are required. Okay, they have reduced those. It used to be every Sunday was required. Used to be all of the saints' days were required, and so on and so forth. Days of obligation, they call them. Okay, well, it's now the days of obligation are much fewer. I think the days of obligation now are, of course, Resurrection, Easter, Christmas. I think maybe, I don't know if Ash Wednesday is one of them or not. It might be. Is Ash Wednesday one of them? Ash Wednesday is one of them. I know in Mexico, in those bishop parishes down there, Lady of Guadalupe, that's in December. That's a day of obligation. But there's probably, I don't know, maybe not even 10 anymore, where there used to be 50. So yeah, Tony's right. That is true. But and again, it didn't accomplish the purpose that they wanted to accomplish. You know, they wanted to. And here's an important point again. When I'm talking about obstacles, and when I'm talking about legalism, I'm not talking about good practice. I'm not talking about Christian good works. All right. I mean, yes. I mean, it's not an option. You know, when God says to remember the Sabbath day, that's not a suggestion. Okay, the Ten Commandments are not suggestions, right? So I'm not saying that when Jesus is being kind to people, Jesus is not putting a lot of obstacles and a lot of works in front of people. I'm not talking about that. I'm not saying it's not important to go to church. I'm not saying it's not important to take communion. I'm not saying it's not important to raise your kids in Sunday school. That's not what I'm talking about. Those are for the Roman Church, for example, even to use the word obligation, that's not a good sense. Okay, these are works of praise. These are works of giving glory to God. These are good works. Okay, and you know we're supposed to do them. Okay, there should be a natural outflow from faith. What I'm talking about is obstacles in the sense of, okay, like in one church I know, the pastor makes a rule, and I know this is very common. If you don't attend the Bible classes, all right, you have to attend the Bible classes first for 6 months or a year before you can be considered for membership. Okay. Well, I like people in Bible class. I like to have my Bible classes full, but I'm not going to make that a requirement. I've never made that a requirement. I will never make that a requirement. Okay. Or I've seen certain churches where, if you miss church, 2/3 of the Sundays or something like that, well, you get put on a special list. You get a series of nasty notes in the mail, or whatever. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about. That's the kind of thing I'm talking. Or one church that I went to in Minnesota where they posted the names of all the members and they posted their contributions in public, okay? And that was kind of shaming to some people. There were some people who didn't or wouldn't or couldn't give for whatever reason. And it was very bragging for the people at the top of the list, I would never do something. Those are the kind of obstacles I'm talking about. That's the kind of snuffing out and the kind of breaking reed that I'm talking about. That's the kind of stuff that we don't need to do.
A lot of people don't go to church.
Exactly. That's also very true. Yes. Yeah.
One of the things about the Wells,
Yeah.
well, it's not the Wells. If you just type in Wells Church, Sierra Vista, you know what the first one comes up? Sierra Vista Lutheran Church,
Oh yeah.
Emmanuel Lutheran.
Yeah.
And it's Trinity.
Yeah.
Really Wells Church.
Yeah.
So even when you try to search for one, you get
Yeah.
Ecumenical, and you get Missouri
Right.
Synod.
Right.
So,
Right.
and I remember coming here, I started to look in the yellow pages of
Uh-huh.
the phone book, and it doesn't say anything about Wells. Who was the lady? She was a nurse and her husband did this. Remember? She had 2 girls.
Oh yeah, Jamie and James. Yeah.
Jamie worked in surgery.
Right.
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 We were just talking that she's Lutheran. I said, oh, well, what? They're the synod are you? She goes, well, the way. What church is that? Because even if you search,
Yeah.
Wells, it gives you everybody.
Yeah, they put us under Lutheran we had Yellow Pages here. They put us under Lutheran, and I asked, could I get a different heading, And I think it would have cost us $1,000 or some stupid thing like that. It was well, you can't trust Google anyway. You can't trust Google anyway. All right. The other comments here have to do with the sections in Mark. Once again, Jesus has a ship at his disposal, used as a speaker's platform. The ship solved 2 problems by separating Jesus from the crowd. It made it easier for Jesus to be seen and heard, and gave Jesus some protection from physical harm. Notice the similarity of actions between these clean and unclean spirits of those previously cast out. So that's taken care of in the section on Mark. Now, we already talked about Jesus spends a night in prayer, and we already talked about choosing the 12, so we're going to skip those 2 for right now and go on to the next section, which the next thing that happens is taken up by Luke. Why did I put Luke 12? It's not Luke 12. It's Luke 6. I don't know where I got 12.
Well, it says Luke 6, 17 through 49.
Really, it's Luke 6 and 7 that we're really going to be looking at.
Are we doing chooses the 12?
What's that?
Now, are you doing section?
No, I'm skipping the next 2 ampersands there. Jesus spends the night in prayer. We already talked about that. And Jesus chooses the 12. Remember, we had the whole thing on the 12 apostles back a few weeks ago.
Luke 6, 17 through 49.
Yes, that's where we're going next.
Okay.
That's where we're going next. So if you'll jump over to Luke, that's the next thing that goes on.
What page, Pastor?
That is going to be 1607.
I think it's 1607.
Yes, I think it is. Now, we've also, of course, spent a couple months on the Sermon on the Mount. So, and the Sermon on the Mount and the Sermon on the Plain, a lot of the same material. So we're not going to spend weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks going back over all of that material again. There are very slight differences between the two. The biggest difference is right there in the first verse of verse 17. Jesus came down, okay? So he went up to get alone, to be alone for a little while, withdraw. Now he comes down with them, the apostles, and stood on a level place. So Sermon on the Mount, he went up on a hill and stood on the top of a hill and preached to all the people. In this case, it's another location. He's coming down from the hill, going to a flat place where a lot of people can spread out, and he's going to preach the sermon there. Now, so whether or not some of these people are the same people that heard the Sermon on the Mount is not important. The fact that the subjects and the words are very much alike is not important. What's important is that Jesus did this preaching and he did it often. I don't know how often. I can't really even guess. My guess is, though, if I was to just kind of think about it for a minute and look at the various movements of Jesus throughout his 3 years of ministry, my assumption, I think, is, or my belief is, that Jesus probably preached this sermon or one very close like it, a kind of a stump speech, you might say, probably a dozen times, maybe even 20 times. Right? This was his go-to sermon. Right? This was a sermon that he would pull out and preach whenever he had a big crowd, he had an opportunity to do so. All right, so a level place, there was a large crowd of disciples, a great throng of people from all Judea and Jerusalem and the coastal region of Tyre and Sidon. So my guess again, too, here is that since Luke mentions this, all right, Tyre and Sidon, of course, are over here. Okay, the Sermon on the Mount, we know, was over here on this side of the Sea of Galilee, a couple in the high hills around Galilee. Probably the Sermon on the Plain is done somewhere around here, right? Because this is a plain. This is the breadbasket of Israel, right? And so there's big meadows and large expanses of ground in that area. And it's close to Tyre and Sidon. Tyre and Sidon up here, so just coming down a little ways would make them able to come and listen. So again, different location, probably a lot of different people, maybe a few the same, but different people, and so on. They would come to hear him to be healed of their diseases, those who were troubled, unclean spirits. So you got three classes. Four classes, really. You've got people who just want to hear the message, just want to hear what Jesus has to say. You've got people who need to be healed of something. You've got people who are troubled. Okay? Today, I guess we would call that, what? Depression, anxiety? Yeah. Something like that. Okay? And then people who are demon-possessed. Okay, they actually had evil spirits possess them. Okay, I think we can understand all of this, all of these things, as diseases certainly, and trouble. That's every once in a while I find an article here and there. What is the cause of the huge increase in depression, anxiety today? Even in the days, I remember as a kid growing up. Maybe some of you do too, in the 50s, 60s. Growing up, duck and cover. Remember that? Okay, duck and cover. Yeah. Yeah. I went to second grade in Salinas, California, and if you know anything about Salinas, you know that right outside the city limits of Salinas is Fort Ord. And Fort Ord in those days, it's been closed, of course, since, but in those days, Fort Ord was a very, very important military installation. And so we were considered, we were always told that in school that we were considered a target. Okay, if there was going to be an atom bomb, one was going to be right around us. So we did the old duck and cover thing, right? Okay, didn't really bother us. I don't remember having any PTSD from that myself. Well, I suppose. We were very poor in those days. Beans was the number one thing for dinner, or a big pot of vegetables of some kind, potatoes. We were very poor. Meat, didn't see meat very often, didn't see steak at all that whole year. Didn't seem to bother me. Didn't seem to bother my brothers at all. They seemed to be fine. So I don't know. I think Bruce maybe mentioned it. I mean, so much communication. We know so much more. We know what's going on in various places. Also, the news media, used to be when I would be waiting to watch TV. I could only watch TV on Friday and Saturday nights. When I was going to school, I was not allowed to watch TV Monday through Thursday or Sunday through Thursday because school is the next day. But so Friday was always anxious to get to the TV on Friday and waiting for my dad to get done watching the news. And the news was 15 minutes. Do you remember that? Remember that? The cavalcade of the news, right? Okay, camels. So, yeah, they're sponsored by camels. Yes. Well, yeah, they gave you good, but it was only 15 minutes. It was only 15 minutes, and Walter Cronkite was never, even Eric Sevareid, they were never what you would call sensational, right? They never came on and said, today, something happened in Washington. It's amazing, right? They were very, right? Those guys were very low-key. Huntley Brinkley, right? Very low-key. Today in Washington, right? Or today in New York. It was very matter of the fact. Nobody got excited. Nobody yelled. So I think the fact that news now is 24 hours, right? And they got to fill all that time, and so they got to talk about a lot of stuff. And of course, they got to compete now. There's how many different news networks? There are all tons of them out there nowadays, and they all got to fight for your attention so that you'll watch their stupid commercials or whatever and buy their stupid products. Okay, and I think it's those things have raised everything to a high level. I had a young person in for counseling the other day, this past week, and the mother told me, they said, well, the person is depressed. And we're worried, Well, okay, fine. And so the person came in and sat down and talked for a while. I don't think they were as depressed as they were. They had the feeling of being useless. They had the feeling, because they didn't know what to do with their life, right? The mom wants the person to be an astronaut. Okay. I don't know, but that's pretty high. That's pretty high, And whenever the young person would maybe not be wanting to go off to the class or working on their studies or whatever, it's what are you going to do with your life? You're wasting your life away. And I told the parent, I said, I don't think they're depressed. I think they're just pressured. They're stressed out. And I think you need to just kind of back off, a little bit.
How old is the kid? If they're in their teens, give them a break.
Well, yeah. Anyway. So yeah, go ahead.
You're saying news used to be 15 minutes. An hour-long news show today is 27 and a half minutes. The rest of the time is commercial.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Unless you get on one of these streaming networks, then it's all the time. Like this Fox Nation thing. They don't have commercials. They just go all the time.
Fox Nation, no commercial.
No commercials. No commercials.
Repeat themselves.
Well, they do. When CNN first came around, about a couple years later, they came on with CNN Headline, and I would literally leave that on all day. I just leave it on like background music. I would just leave it on all day long, and then those days it was recycled every 30 minutes, and I would just leave it on, and then stories would change 4 or 5 times a day maybe. But anyway, I think that the troubled business that you see here is certainly stress, depression, anxiety, fear, that kind of thing. And I think it's not so much that we have more to worry about or more to be fearful of or more to be anxious about. I simply believe that there's more that we see, more that we hear, more that we know, right? And these people, they existed. If you left your village ever in your life, you were considered, wow, that was unique. Okay, most people, Jews, for example, they would go to Jerusalem, 25 miles from most everywhere in Israel, 30 miles, maybe 40 miles from Sea of Galilee. That was about it, and not everybody did that. There are a lot of people who never did that. We're much more exposed, I think, and it's not so much that our lives are worse. I think that our lives are just more full of noise. Huh? There's a lot going on.
Still have one in New York City.
Oh yeah.
You've got people there that they don't know anything past 5
Well, that's true too. Yeah. Let's just read through this real quick. They had come to hear him. Okay, all the people were trying to touch him and all that. And then he turned his face towards his disciples and began to say, "Blessed are you, are poor." Again, notice this, much like the Sermon on the Mount, Beatitudes here. Verse 23, "Be glad in your day and leap for joy. Your reward is great in heaven." Again, pretty much what he said. "Woe to you who are rich, for you're receiving your comfort in full." That's an addition. That was not said in the Sermon on the Mount. So Jesus, again, veering a little bit away from the Sermon on the Mount, now adding a little bit something here, maybe because this area, the other side of the Sea of Galilee, a little more commerce going on. You're more likely to see some rich merchants and things like that, perhaps, in the crowd. Okay? Well-fed and hungry, speak well of you, and all that. "I say to you, love your enemies." Again, repeat. "Bless those who curse you. Whoever hits you on the cheek, turn the other cheek." Again, right out of the Sermon on the Mount. Next page. "Give to people who ask you. Do not demand it back. Treat others the way they want to treat you." Again, very much like Sermon on the Mount. "If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you?" Same question he asked in Sermon on the Mount. If you lend, and say number 35, verse 35, "Love your enemies, do good to them, expect nothing in return, your reward will be great," and so on and so forth. Verse 37, "Do not judge." A whole section, remember, on the Sermon on the Mount was on judging, and so he gives it here. "Give, and you will be given to you. Pour it into your lap, and so by your standard, it will be measured to you." Next section. "Blind man cannot lead a blind man. Will he not fall into a pit? A pupil is not above his teacher. Why do you look the speck that's in your brother's eye, but not yours?" Again, very much the same material. Verse 43, "There's no good tree that produces bad fruit, or on the other hand, a bad tree which produces good fruit. Each tree is known by itself. The good man out of the good treasure of his heart brings what is good." Verse 46, "Why do you call me Lord? Do not say what I say. Everyone comes to me, hears my voice, and acts on them. I'll show you who he's like." And then he ends it the same way as he ends the Sermon on the Mount. So the ending is the same. The beginning is the same with the Beatitudes, the blessings, and the ending is the same. But in the middle, again, a number of changes. Some things he says in the Sermon on the Mount, he does not say in this sermon. Some things he says here, he does not say in the Sermon on the Mount. So he ends the same way. The man built on the foundation of the rock, the flood occurred, and so on and so forth, and it was well built and did not act accordingly on the ground other kind of foundation. The torrent burst against it, it collapsed, and the ruin of the house was great. So again, I think this is a sermon that Jesus preaches many, 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 many times. Certainly 4, 5, 6 times a year in various different places. And there's plenty of spots where you can fit it in, where you can say, yeah, you can see he can spend an afternoon or a morning giving this sermon. Anything on that before we head to the next section? What's that?
My favorite is 46.
Okay.
Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do what I ask?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're praying for everything, but we know what he wants us to do, but we
Yeah.
don't do it. And then we
Yeah.
pray it.
Yeah, you know, again, that's the height of hypocrisy. To say, well, I believe Jesus is God. I believe the Bible is God's word, but the Bible tells me this, but I'm not going to do it. That's the height of hypocrisy and foolishness. It really is. All right. Oh, we got a whole 5 minutes, but we'll try anyway. Let's just start on chapter 7 of Luke. He was completed all the discourse in the hearing of people. He went to Capernaum. So again, short trip. He's in this plain. He's either, this plain is a nice big plain, this plain over here, nice big plain. So it's kind of a short trip to make it to the top there of the Sea of Galilee. Not long, 5 miles, days walk, so something like that. And the centurion's slave was highly regarded by him, was sick and about to die. When he heard about Jesus, he sent some Jewish elders asking him to come and save the life of his slave. When they came to him, they earnestly implored him, saying, he is worthy for you to grant this to him, for he loves our nation, and it was he who built us our synagogue. Jesus started on his way, and when he was not far from the house, the centurion sent friends, saying, Lord, do not trouble yourself, for I am not worthy to come to you under my roof. For this reason, I did not consider myself worthy to come to you. Just say the word, and my servant will be healed. I am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. I say to this one, go, and he goes, and the other one, come, and he comes. And to my slave, do this, and he does it. Now when Jesus heard this, he marveled at him and turned and said to the crowd that was following him, I say to you, not even in Israel have I found such great faith. So not even among God's own people. This is a Gentile, obviously, he's a Roman. Or if not a Roman, he's at least been somebody who has grown up in the Roman Empire, grown up in Roman household, let's put it that way. Not too likely that he would not be a citizen and then reach the rank of centurion. It was possible, but probably not likely. And those who had been sent returned to the house, and they found the slave in good health. So again, this is a miracle done by remote control, if you will, as Jesus is able to do it from afar. So, comments. We'll get a few of these done anyway. We know Jesus now returns to Capernaum, his base of operations. We know from Matthew chapter 8 that the centurion was a Gentile. He was already a Jewish proselyte or convert. So this is somebody that had somehow, some way, again, not through outreach efforts for sure, but himself just seeing and hearing the way the Jews conducted themselves, at least the ones he knew, he was drawn to their faith. Okay, he was drawn to their religion. The servant was sick and in much pain, he was about to die. The centurion had heard of the powers of Jesus, so he sent elders of the Jews to ask Jesus to heal his servant. The elders introduced Jesus to the deeds of the centurion, trying to show that he was worthy of mercy. The centurion had built a synagogue in Capernaum at his own expense. Pretty rare. You know, how much autonomy does a centurion have? I don't know. I don't know, what the command structure was in northern Israel and Galilee at that time. Could have been that he was probably the head man in that whole area. Maybe he had somebody over him or not, I don't know. So he could probably get away with this. But obviously he was also a man of means And this was, many centurions came from noble Roman families. They were called equestrian families. And the equestrian class in Rome was what we would call today in our society upper class, okay, the rich. The centurion knew he was unworthy because he understood the Jewish belief concerning mixing with Gentiles. So obviously it hung around with Gentiles enough, or Jews enough to know that Jews and Gentiles normally don't mix. Therefore he had a solution that would heal the servant and keep Jesus from violating Jewish customs. He understood the power of the word of one in authority. In his military occupation, the centurion could command soldiers and servants, and they would obey. Matthew names the disease as palsy. Luke does not, but Matthew does. Luke, the physician, refrains from naming it. Jesus told his followers that the centurion had greater faith than any Jew he had found. Here we have another example of Jesus healing over a distance. By the time the messengers had returned home, the servant was healed. Top of the next page, note that Matthew contains material not recorded by Luke, a prediction of a massive Gentile conversion, and second, a great apostasy by the Jews. We should probably look at that a little bit next time before we move on to the rest of chapter 7 of Luke. So we will do that. Questions, comments, concerns?
When did the Catholic Church start?
When does it what?
When did it begin? The Catholic Church?
Oh, the Roman Church. Well, yeah, the Roman Church began in the first century. Easy, yeah. The Roman Church began, we think, probably from Jews leaving Jerusalem after Pentecost. We know many Jews lived in Rome at the turn of the centuries, and they were merchants and whatever there, and some had immigrated, and then they had gone to Jerusalem for Passover, and then stayed for Pentecost, for the Feast of Weeks, harvest, and then we're heading back, and probably were among the 3,000 that were baptized that day in Jerusalem. So yeah, went back to, and from there, the Roman Church was the church. It wasn't exclusive, but it was pretty much the church for a long time. But every other major population area was its own church too, for the first 4 centuries. And then the Roman Church really didn't become preeminent until after Gregory the Great in 600. And then probably over the next 400 years, it expanded its authority until it ran up against the Greeks, the Orthodox, and then they split in 1054, and it's been the same ever since.
And then the Lutheran Church branched out in
1517, yeah, Reformation. Luther, really, there weren't Lutheran congregations, so to speak, in Germany until probably 1530s or so, 1540s, around there. Luther died in, trying to think what year that was, 54? 1554, something like that. But by the time of the Council of Trent in 1545,